My name is James Barany, and of the many hats I wear, experimental animator is one of those. I'm also a faculty member at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design and perform with the Florentine Opera. I'm also a fairly well-known muralist in the area, so I've got my hands in all kinds of creative pots. The project that most recently has been released in tandem is called Aurora, and it is a project with my studio, and then also Olga, Olga, and Olga is a vocal ensemble, a professional music group. They are based in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam area. They have members wide-reaching from Europe, Iceland, Greenland, a few from England. So it's a really diversified cross-section of that European culture. They're kind of a professional a boy or men's band, but they get into very complex liturgical or also very layered kinds of more classical music. I had the wonderful ability to make friends with one of these individuals when I was in graduate school at the University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we were in chorus and in opera together. His name is Matthew Smith. And Matthew is from London proper, but now has moved to Amsterdam. And he contacted me to see if there would be a way that we could venture together, if I could help them with album design and doing some animation to some of their new releases on their most recent recording, which is, the album is Aurora, but it's a new collection of about 15 works that they've been working on specifically through the entire COVID period when we've all been shut down. And so it was a great venture. I believe our first discussions were last year, so that would have been the very, very end of 2020. Just kind of throwing some ideas back and forth. And so what ended up occurring from this was them sending me fairly high-grade footage of them performing a couple of these new works live and in cathedrals and all kinds of places where they had really great shots, just documenting a performance, but it was nothing more than that. And then after hours online with Zoom meetings and kind of getting into the nuances of what each piece was regarding, I then went at it from a video end and started montaging and bringing in all these different kind of ethereal and natura-based kinds of ideas, either through static imagery and or through video montage, until I had helped them kind of in tandem create this kind of new idea for their work, which was based on their performance, but then it kind of would float in and out of consciousness of nature and the ideas of the Aurora Borealis. And the whole thing here is the idea of this darkness is followed by a great rebirth, almost like the idea of the phoenix. So it starts in tonal darkness, but by the end of the album, you have this rebirth, which is kind of beautiful. And their nuances and the perfection of their singing really amplify this through audio. So I automatically had really good recording of their singing. All these little small nuances, I could just go into the visual. And so then what I started doing was painstakingly taking these moments of video that we had created and just breaking it down into a rotoscoping exercise. And rotoscoping, again, is where you're really tracing or responding to visual stimuli that is captured in video. This precedes Snow White, going all the way back. But Carl Flesher, I believe, is the first person that I know actually Max got Fletcher. It. Max Fletcher, excuse me, not Carl. But that whole thing amplified. But the rotoscoping we're doing is hardly that. It's digital painting. It's the nuances that are happening. When I see something visual, I'm bringing it out, and I'm responding to these frames. And then what I'm really doing in a very unique way, rather than a rotoscoping crew, which may have multiple people really kind of doing that very authentic working in 2s or 3s to get through a second of footage, I'm literally creating a very refined image approximately every 1.1 or 1.2 seconds. And then I am using AI programs to help me do all of the in-betweens. So the thing that I've been kind of collating between the three programs have been After Effects, Photoshop at a higher level, and then coming back and using EB Synth. And EB Synth is open shareware. It was introduced to me in an experimental animation class that I was actually teaching by a student, saying, this is kind of interesting. We know about this software, but no one knows how to use it. I liken it to a very soft version of what you might find in artistic coding. There's a small amount of coding that has to go on, very, very minimal. But what you're doing is you're basically telling the computer how objects rotate and how they move. And once you can define if an object moves to the left or to the right, and you can show the computer exactly what the end result of those motions are, then you can go through and run these small batches, and it will give you, and it'll basically expolate these frames as if you were painting each one. You can go back through and make decisions that's working, that isn't, or I forgot about this moment, because the computer is completely ridiculously stupid in this regard. It doesn't know what's turning or rotating, or that there may be an ambient sense of smoke or light in the background. So that's the painstaking part. But once you start to get used to the idea of really navigating in the frame where things are moving and where they're going, then it can get really into a phenomenal new amplitude of doing this kind of rotoscoping. So it's this hybrid of AI, of kind of being very visceral with drawing and painting skills and a digital representation, but yet everything is still connected to that video frame somehow. I'm just reassigning and reassessing it. And it takes almost as much time as normal rotoscoping in the downfall, because post-production really consumes you. But I believe we made a couple of pieces. Aurora is the first big one that we did. And that piece is probably sits in the ballpark of a 6-minute section. And we did a much smaller piece that's more liturgical and more Christian based, and it's Estonian. So we have two pieces that are coupled, but we really wanted to promote Aurora first.
Talk about Olga for a second, just to back up.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that you knew someone that from a previous experience now working with
Yep.
Olga. How long have they been around?
Olga's had a couple of iterations. I want to say right now they're in their 4th or 5th year, just really trying to come to a formation of who they are. I know they've had a couple of switch outs in some of the vocal positions. I believe they are a group right now that there are 5 individuals. Again, I think almost every individual comes from a specifically different country in Europe. They have a fairly decent sized following, but again, their repertoire, so to speak, is much bigger than just pop or something that would be construed as classical. It's more enveloped, and it really is a singers group. These guys are good. They are all at an operatic level, but that's not the kind of performance that really calls to them. It's the nuances of these singing, and that's really the wonderful part. I have yet to see them live. We had every intent, my wife and I, to go over at the opening of this big project and to kind of show up unexpectedly, but COVID at the time when the planning was happening was forbidding basically us to go to the countries that we would need to go to. With great irony, those bans were lifted right at the last minute, but we at that point didn't have our preparations in place, and we need to get our passports updated, etc. So that would have been a wonderful surprise to show up on the doorstep. Something they're trying to do, I think, with certain levels of success, because each time they do a show in a cathedral or in a place that's really qualified for this kind of singing, they tend to show some of these projections pretty big. So I think that would be an interesting thing to see it live and see how they would respond back and forth, because as you know, the frames are determined, right? And that tempo is at a certain pace, and you can't modify that very easily when you're doing live work. So, but they have multiple albums that have been released, and again, largely across Europe, a pretty significant following, and I think they're fairly well known now in the Amsterdam area proper.
You mentioned this as a collaboration with them in the paperwork you sent. So what kind of input did they have while you're working on the animation?
Well, with great irony, it was never intended to be an animation. That came from me pushing back. So because Matthew is like a brother to me, when they reached out to me, I said, I'm going to do all of the work for you pro bono. And I said, I really want this to be done right and take your ideas and the concepts. And it's a small red kettle, which is how they identify a steaming red kettle, and it sits in this deep nether woods of the northern forest, and smoke starts to rise through the trees and through the cedars until that smoke starts to transfigure and be kind of metamorphosizes into the Aurora Borealis. And it was taking that concept, and I said to them, do you have any, when we were doing these concepts back and forth, and this is just for static art, this is just doing illustration and design work for their album, for their CDs, and they actually do print and burn out vinyl now, or they press out vinyl. And I said, would you by chance have footage of you all performing this live? I said, I have some really interesting ideas and animation that could go with this. And they sat down and listened to me. They sent me off, gigabytes of footage that they had. And then we had to make sure that the footage I was using was really done at the right recording level. Because as I said, going back in and doing that stuff, the way we're approaching this is a little backward. And all of a sudden, I sent them a couple of tests. And the tests, Ross, were nothing more than 10 seconds. I said, would you like me to pursue this after this? And I sent them maybe 20 seconds of footage. They went ballistic. They're like, how did you do what you're doing? And I tried to explain this process. But even in that 20 seconds, I probably had produced something like 25 or 30 keyframes. And then from those 25 or 30 keyframes, using the AI technology, some of that coding and my digital and painting and drawing skills, totally sold them on this. Then as soon as we got done with the static art. So that was the basis for the rest of the piece, because we were trying to use that work to define how the animation should look in the other works. And then we just went to town. And then that was, Peter is their leader, so to speak. Peter's from Russia. He's got dual citizenship as well in the United States. Peter and I must have probably gone back and forth weekly for 2 months straight. And then it was really kind of interesting because it was a volley. I'd say, how's this? And they would push back. And until I think the merger became one that was bigger than any of us as individuals or groups. You always get that beautiful synergy that happens when you combine and cohesively try to work with somebody else. There's always like an overtone that's created that's impossible for either of the entities to do it themselves. It's like an exquisite corpse drawing. Something unusual always happens when two artists merge, but they don't define what the rules are. It's a conversation. So it's really kind of what happened.
How long have you been an experimental animator? I've known you for a number of years, and you were mostly into painting and illustration.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got into it a little bit at the end of the undergraduate experience. So, my undergrad ended at 92. My entire thesis kind of was generated in this way. And the best way to say what my work might have looked like at that time was kind of a roving it would be close to like something of William Kentridge without the idea of apartheid being the thing that was driving me. I'm very much into the idea of experiential understanding, the idea of really just this definition of being human, consciousness, memory. These are things that kind of really promote a lot of the things that I make. And I was toying with this as I started to go into grad school. Now, ironically, when I went into grad school, so this would have been at the same time, 92, 93, they were very quarantined yet. And, basically If you were going to do drawing and painting, you went to that program. If you were going to do filmmaking, you went to that program. So I really needed an inter-arts program, but it didn't exist. So I begged a couple of faculty to be lenient. And in that leniency, something I think really wonderful was created, which was this ability for me to play with the ideas of cinema and those supporting ideas, and then with drawing and painting. And then, Ross, what you might not understand either is that from my end of my first year as an undergrad, so we're looking at 88, 89, I had already been hired at the Art Museum as a preparatory technician and as a theater technician. So for 3 years of my undergrad, I was getting constant training in experimental animation and slightly off-center animated works that the Art Museum had in their collection, that I would, as a projectionist, project every week and get on the PA and make the announcements, well, join us in the multimedia theater for XYZ this afternoon. And so you get hundreds of hours of learning without somebody dictating to you how to do these things. And Loda Renneberg, I mean, so many people I was introduced to, Loda Renneberg and Carolyn Leaf, animators. So I just gave you a German. I also gave you somebody from Canada. People I never would have been exposed to were right there in our collection, or they come in and they're part of a series that we're showing. And so you get this really kind of backward education in it. And I started to weave all these things together so that by the time I was a junior faculty member, when I was hired out of grad school, I won the Mary Nohl Emerging Fellowship, and basically that was in experimental animation, experimental media, for a series of works that I was doing that was really looking at self and trying to use the ideas of Howard Gardner and multiple intelligences, and how I could try to challenge myself as a human being to be a better version of who I was, trying to deal with issues of weight loss, my difficulties at times with language because I'm slightly dyslexic. So I had a piece that was translated into 20 languages. And all of this was using video montage, techniques of animation, and just using it as a way to probe and think through ideas. So that was around 2007. I really made pretty big waves. I had several works in film festivals at that point. But my job as a faculty member, where I'm at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, is just, I had to diversify my skill sets, because if they needed me to teach certain classes, they knew that I could. Then you're putting certain things on the back burner, so to speak, right? So I can teach all introductory and classes in that manner, but the ones that I probably really enjoy the most is when they give me advanced classes in experimental animation, which recently have been fairly popular, especially during COVID, because you can deliver that content fairly seamlessly online. And then, kind of you mentioned it prior, but like I have really extended knowledge with human anatomy, drawing and painting, taking students to Marquette to the cadaver lab to draw from specimens there. So then you get into this other really weird niche that I have. So I get pulled and prodded as needed as a faculty member, but that always seems to impact what I'm doing in the studio. But those are, like I said, I wear multiple hats. And then again, on top of that, I sing with the Florentine Opera in town. So I'm on stage or I'm researching, etc. So it's complicated, but this has been a nice return to get back into experimental animation at a minimum. And I have no idea if this will continue for a while, or if I'll be on to another thing or return to something else that I just can't see coming around the corner.
Well, thank you so much, James. Thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. My pleasure.